I'm instead going to go on a trip. And he runs out the door and goes as fast as he can down to Tarshish, buys a ticket on the first boat that he can find, and he sets out to sea going the exact opposite direction. Now, you'd think, on the surface, wow, Jonah, he's so merciful, and he feels so sorry for these people of Nineveh, and God's told him he's going to destroy them, and so he doesn't want any part of that, and so Jonah's going to go away. And no, sorry, it was actually the exact opposite. The reason that Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh was because Jonah knew this God that he served. And he knew that when people repent, God is merciful. And he didn't want any mercy on the people of Nineveh. He wanted them destroyed. Why? Well, Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians were not known as your touchy-feely, can't we just all get along kind of people. The Assyrians were the kind of people that rolled into town, and when they said heads would roll, they really did mean it. And heads rolled, and they got put on spikes outside the city, and they said, now, anybody else that wants to come against us, your fate's going to be similar. They were a brutal, violent people who just came in and cleaned house, literally. They came into northern Israel, and they picked all the people up out of Israel and deported them to another country. And then they brought new people in. It was a great strategy to keep people off balance. If you're transported to a foreign country, you don't know the language, the culture, the geography, you don't know the places to hide, you have no way to form an army and rise up against this foreign power that's come in. So it was a great way for them to keep their people in line. The Israelites hated the Assyrians. They hated them. And Jonah wanted God to destroy them. So he said, I'm not going to do it. Well, so Jonah headed out to sea, and you all probably know the story. There's a big old storm, and Jonah was asleep in the bottom of the boat. Now, I think must have been a miracle. I don't know. How are you asleep in a boat that's going up and down in the waves? But Jonah was asleep, and they came and got him, and they said, you know, what's going on, man? And Jonah finally admitted. He said, all right, guys, it's me. I'm running away from God, and so I don't want you guys to die, so just throw me overboard. And so they took about 2 seconds and said, okay. Actually, it was a great opportunity for them to come to know the Lord, because after they threw him overboard, the waves stopped and the seas calmed. Does that remind you of anybody, by the way? And so they called out to the Lord. Jonah, on the other hand, had a little appointment with a big fish, probably not a whale, prior to opposite of what you probably have been told, but a big fish, I don't know, a big groper or big old sea bass or something, and in goes Jonah. 3 days later, a poor fish has a big stomach ache, and throws Jonah up on the shore. 3 days later, and Jesus is saying, first of all, this is the sign that you're going to get. Because Jonah was 3 days in the fish. Effectively, he was in the grave. He was dead. And 3 days later, the fish threw him up on the beach. And the same way, Jesus says, I'm going to be 3 days in the heart of the earth, and then I am going to rise from the dead. Which is the greatest sign that you could ever have. It's the death, burial, and resurrection. That's the sign that really counted. That's the one that really made a difference. And so Jesus says, that's the sign you're going to get. And then he goes on to talk about what happened after Jonah came back from the dead. He decided he would obey God, and he didn't want to smell like fish anymore. So he went to Nineveh, and he preached to them, and God's going to destroy you. And the Ninevites said, oh no, we better repent. And they did repent. And Jonah's great. He after that happens, he says, it says, it displeased Jonah exceedingly. In other words, Jonah was bummed to the max. And he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, oh Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? That's why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. God, I knew you were merciful and I didn't want you to be merciful. I'm now mad. I'm going to throw a little fit. He does. He says, therefore now please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. I'd rather die than see you have mercy on these Ninevites. But Jesus' point is that the people of Nineveh heard the words of judgment that were coming as a consequence of sin. They believed the messenger and took action on the message. And that is not what the Pharisees did when they heard Jesus. After Jesus is resurrected from the dead, there will be the opportunity to hear and to obey. They will turn their back. So then he goes on in verse 42 and he says, the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. And what does this refer to? We're back now in 1 Kings chapter 10. Solomon has taken over the kingship from his father David, and the queen of Sheba, this Arabian Gentile, has heard about Yahweh. And it says that she came to see what all the fuss about the name of the Lord was. And she arrived in Solomon's court and was completely impressed with God. And she said, I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. And yet Jesus says, you've laid your eyes on someone far greater than Solomon. And if the Gentiles were so impressed that they were just falling down in worship over the Lord, why aren't you? They would not, like her, believe. And I think for us, part of our problem is that we pretend to be somebody else, and we pretend that God is somebody else. And I've said this before, a lot of times our problem is that we overlay what we want our image of God to be upon Him. And then when He doesn't act like we think He's supposed to act, we go, well, what's the deal with you, God? You should do what I want you to do. And in fact, the opposite is true. We should let God overlay His character